Thank you so much for having me here today. My session is titled Disability as the Visual Language, Technology and Accessibility. So just before I get started, here is a little bit about my PhD practice research. So my practice constructs a visual language about disability, as I felt there was a lack of visual representation of disability. The images explore what it's like to have a disability, focusing on the unseen dimensions, and it explores what happens with and through the body. The work also focuses on how my body engages with technology for independence and accessibility, and is a critique on how technology is not always as accessible in the ways it can be used, especially with a physical disability. Some key points to consider is that I use myself, my position, and my experiences at the center of my practice research. So the visual language of disability is constructed through my physical disability, which is Cerebral Palsy Spastic Quadriplegia. And it essentially means that the part of my brain that helps with movement got damaged due to a lack of oxygen to the brain either before or during birth. And as a result, it affects all 4 of my limbs with spasms, as parts of my body as well. I have no balance whatsoever, so I'm a wheelchair user, and my coordination is poor. So I use the disability narrative, and it's essential to my practice and my research because I'm looking at my own experiences, but also considering the social, historical, and cultural context in which my disability is placed in and how my body is positioned and how that impacts my position. So you're probably wondering, but how am I getting away with doing an entire PhD about myself? Well, I'm using a research methodology called autoethnography, and Caroline Ellis describes her approach to autoethnography as I start to write about my personal life and pay attention to my physical feelings, thoughts, and emotions. I use what I call a systematic sociological introspection and emotional recall to try and understand an experience I've lived through. Then I write my experience as a story. So I'm reinterpreting this process, and my research takes on a visual autoethnographical approach to construct my personal narrative, exploring the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are embedded within my disability experiences. So when I first started off this research, I was very reluctant to include my disability as part of the PhD. And this was essentially because I felt there was always a fine line between disability being seen as negative or positive. And it's this idea that disability has always been stigmatized or associated with negative imagery, connotations, and ideas of the body. And then this overly positive connotation is normally seen that disability is a tragedy. So the person who is a person with a disability is seen as an inspiration. So when they achieve success or achievements, they are someone who aspire to, and in spite of their disability, they've done something. So this is something I feel like I grew up with because my family, I guess, wanted to find a way to understand my disability. So they kept telling me that it was a positive thing and that I can achieve anything I set my mind to, which I agree to some extent, but I wanted to use this research practice to kind of create my own realistic representation of disability. I'm focusing on both the seen and unseen dimension of my disability, because even though it's physical, there's aspects of it that cannot be seen or understood, really. And disability is a social construct that changes over time. And I think even if people have the same disabilities, we all have different experiences. Our backgrounds and our personal experiences add and contribute to our experiences, how we see our bodies and our disabilities, how we represent that. And even people with different disabilities might have some similar experiences, but we all experience our bodies and disabilities in our own ways. So how did I get started? So I initially actually started photographing my right hand with my iPhone. This was because I get very severe spasms in my right hand. And just to kind of put it in context, is my right hand is more severely affected by the spasms and the tremors. I don't know if you can see a little. But I started off with my iPhone because I needed a more intimate and instant way to photograph my hand, because the spasms can be really intense. And I couldn't use my DSLR or camera because I couldn't use it without both my hands. I also had problems using it with one hand because it's quite heavy and it's too large for my hand. And using a tripod was quite difficult to set up. and I needed assistance as well, but I needed to be able to photograph on my own without depending on someone else. So photography in this way helped me to document my hand, but it was missing some of the aspects of things that happen with my hand as well. So I use post-production editing, such as graphics and colors and things, to add to the images to construct my experiences. When I was looking at this idea, I was to deconstruct and reconstruct the imagery because I wanted to play with the idea that the disabled body is often seen as fragile and broken. And I also wanted to play with this idea that there's always a binary opposition throughout art history on how the body has been represented, if it's non-normal or non-disabled, and disabled or normal and abnormal. But then I also wanted to add my own multi-layered context on top of that. So I use colors and graphics to signify red, that I am in pain a lot alongside the spasms. Blue was to indicate that with the spasms, if the temperatures get colder, it seems to worsen and increase. Yellow was kind of there to signify the unpredictable movements, tremors, and twitches I get as well. So for me, it was a great way to kind of record all these experiences. But what was missing was my left hand. My left hand is the hand that does most of the work. So again, to put it in context, of my right hand, because I've got so many dexterity and gripping issues, I actually couldn't hold my iPhone with my right hand to take photos of my left hand. It kept shaking uncontrollably, and I just couldn't hold it in place and press the shutter at the same time. So I started thinking about how this hand is missing, my artist hand that does all the work that I do most of my tasks with, because my right hand is the supporting hand to hold things in place or to hold my body in place when I have to stand or transfer from the wheelchairs. So for me, my hands become this motif throughout my work, as you'll see, because they are my sources of mobility, access, and independence. So I rely a lot on my hands to do different tasks. But this left hand essentially does all my artwork, all my daily tasks, the things I can't do with my right hand. So I started thinking about how can I document it, because it's missing. It's there for the physicality and the materiality of the work, and through the processes it's there, but visually it's missing. So I started to put my hand in a flatbed scanner because it was next to me on my desk during COVID. And I thought, if I could scan documents and photographs, why not scan my hand? And it was probably one of the best things I've ever done, because it became my accessible lens-based practice, something that helped me in a way that traditional photography couldn't, because I couldn't use the camera on my own without support. And I wanted to find a more independent way to make work about my own disability. So my work isn't just about my disability, but it's about the process of making the work and how my disability and spasms add to and contribute to that experiences. And I make decisions on my practice, or my methods of making my practice based on my experiences with my disability. So the flatbed scanner didn't just record my hand, but it recorded the fingerprints, the hand marks, everything that was to do with my hand engaging with and working with the scanner. So for me, I started thinking about how all the devices we kind of use, the technology devices, sometimes have these touchscreen interfaces. And how if you have gripping issues or functionality issues with your hands as well, with physical disabilities, this could be very temperamental and difficult to access. Even I myself sometimes can't even use my fingerprints properly to be able to open and unlock my devices. So I started thinking about how this influences my practices and my choices. And then looking at this hand that was missing and how I brought it in and how it's significant to me, I started looking at the iconography of the hand throughout art history, and it's also how it's been used in technology. So the first thing I noticed is that there's always been significance of value placed on the white male artist's hand, and throughout history, the female or the woman hand and the disabled hand is missing. It's not celebrated. It's not seen as significant. So I started thinking about how the cultural, social, and cultural context of how my body has been seen throughout history as well influences my position now, and how that also adds to the way people see the disabled body or the woman body itself. But then when I looked at technology and the links to my hands as well, I found that the devices I was using, such as my iPhone, was actually designed with the average male hand in mind. It wasn't designed for someone such as myself, who's a woman, who has small hands and is a disabled person with a physical disability. So if you want to read more about it, I'll suggest The Invisible Women by Caroline Credio Perez. I'm sorry, I did not pronounce her very well, but she's wrote about how these devices have been designed of the average male hand and mind. So even my iPhone SE, which is the smallest version of the iPhone, is slightly actually too big even for my left hand. So sometimes I lose my grip. It's fallen on my face before when I scroll, so I won't recommend that to people. And it's just how these little things can sometimes add to your experiences when you're trying to make work or to communicate with other people and engage in the spaces you are. And I started thinking about how this becomes a larger body of work, about how technology is accessible and it supports me in some extent, but it's also quite limited and challenging in the ways that can be used and accessed. So for me, this has become a really important part of my work to explore. So on the next slide that I wanted to show you as well, I don't know if the screen is cutting off any of the images, but I wanted to kind of show this idea of how eventually using the flatbed scanner has allowed me to really explore this language of disability as well. Because I started scanning my right hand, and these were just test samples I did. So I didn't think about where my hand would go, where I would place it. I just put it in the scanner. And this time I was playing with the DPI because I changed to an Epson scanner. So I think some of the highest I've gone up to is 1,200, where when I tried to use it a bit bigger DPI, it kind of wouldn't record or the files wouldn't open. So for me, this was the best kind of size to work with, and it slowed down the scanner for the details, but it was also a great way just to place my hand in the scanner and kind of wait to see what happens. So as much as I tried to keep my hand as still as possible, it did record every little tremor, every little spasm, everything that happened with my hand during this period. So you can see where the lines came from the scanner, where it glitched, and where the scan would have had an effect because of the movement. That is how it recorded my hand's movement. And for me, this actually started opening this dialogue of what is really happening with my body, how the spasms and disability affects my hands and my functionality to be able to do things. Because it was finally recording what was happening with my hand and how it affects things that I do. And for me, this was a great way, because before this, I wasn't able to talk about my work in so much detail until I had the visual language to describe what, or to articulate what was happening. So for me, this was a game changer, to say the least. And I don't know, it was for me a really great way to go back and forth between the same concepts. And it's not to record my hand the whole time and to perfect the image, but it was a way to start documenting and recording both my hands at the same time, and to kind of, I'll show you in a bit what I mean about the same time, because I actually had to start off scanning both my hands separately, trying to record the same movements and compositions to show what is happening with both my hands. So I would scan my left hand first for a couple of hours one day, and the next day I scanned my right hand, trying to mimic the same posture as possible to show the differences and similarities. So even this has allowed me now to show visually what's happening, to be able to talk about it. So you can see with my left hand, things are more relaxed. It still gets spasms and movements, but not to such a severe extent. The right hand, I really struggled to keep my posture in place. And also it kept shaking and it kept having the tremors and the spasms. And for me, this really starts to kind of create that language of the different things that's happening. And it becomes an archive of my body and my experiences as a disabled person. And I was also very inspired by reading this book by Julieta Sign, which is titled The Archive Will Never Restore You, where she writes about how your different experiences from your ill health and everything that happens to you becomes part of your body archive. It's an archive of your body. So I started thinking of my work that way, because I keep returning to the same things over the different times of the year to record how weather temperatures and changes affect my body and my disability. If I've had ill health, does that impact my body? I've also looked at when I'm more fatigued some days and other days when I've had better rest. But I've also actually recorded and photographed times when I have fallen over, injured myself. I even had a stage where I bent my left hand, and I also put my left hand in the scanner with a bandage, luckily. So I wanted to kind of look at how different factors such as access, health, and different conditions that add to and contribute to my disability also impact the way my body functions and how my functionality and my hands alter as well. To the next slide. So this is work I've kind of done last summer. So the summer just passed. And for me, this was a great way to kind of starting to demonstrate how my hands and my body function and work together. And the technology really allows me to do that, because here I put both my hands in the scanner and I made several images where I wanted to show the relationship between not just my hands, but my body, my disability, and technology. And this kind of shows how, in a way, when I work with my hands, I kind of have to think of the task at hand. Apologies for the pun. But I also have to think about both my hands when they're working together and trying to do tasks, because I have to try and relax and ease the spasms as well. And think of ways to kind of get my hands to coordinate with each other and work with each other. Because sometimes with my physical disability, it can be quite challenging and frustrating at the same time, not to see it in a negative light, but it's that I have to work around the spasms and the tremors and all the pains and things to be able to do what I do, because otherwise, if I don't really think of different ways to approach things or alternative processes in this way to make my work, it can be quite challenging to record my experiences as well. So with the scanner, it was actually a great way, because the more I was doing work with my hands and moving them around the scanner, you can see my left hand retained the posture. It only had some tremors and some spasms, but the right hand got so fatigued and so tired after all of this that I kind of lost the posture, and I started losing control of my hand. And by the last image, it just slipped out of place and I couldn't get it to move back into position. And I think it's a very interesting part, because this has allowed me to really demonstrate and explore things about my disability in ways I've never been able to do. And it's allowed me to really have that visual language to talk about my experiences. And also for me, the scanner really works in a way I've never thought I could have a lens-based practice to work. But even that can be quite temperamental sometimes, because when I scan, I have to set up the mark really quickly first and then place my left hand or both my hands in the scanner. Because as much as I can sometimes use one of my fingers on my right hand, I cannot really interact with the computer that much. So it's basically setting it up and then putting my hand in the scanner as fast as I humanly can, so I don't miss that opportunity when the scanner starts. So a lot of it is still in work in progress of me trying to figure out how to do things, and again, working with and around my disability. Because one thing I actually wanted to say in the beginning, which I forgot to add, is for me, my disability has always been part of who I am. It doesn't define me and it doesn't make me who I am. But for me, it's been a great way to really understand my body and how it works, and to be able to share this personal journey with people. And because I've been talking quite a lot, I'm going to finish it off with this. The most crucial part of my practice developments has been the use of technology. As part of my PhD practice research, it constantly questions and considers the accessibility of the devices I use. Without a doubt, the project cannot be what it is without thinking about the practice processes and the making of the practice. The research also focuses on the support, limitations, and challenges in accessing technology and technological devices. As a practitioner with a physical disability, the alternative photographic processes, such as the scanner, enabled me to make artwork, but to what extent is it fully accessible if I cannot access the technology or the devices with my right hand? And that's to bring it to a close. There's my little bibliography. Thank you so much for your patience and for letting me present online. I appreciate it.
Juanrie.